close enough? Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or in their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. Some of you may have seen Berlinski in the movie Expelled. He's a philosopher of science teaching in France. He's made short work and, frankly, a lot of mincemeat of the stuff that these atheists are so often talking about and trumpeting. What I've told you is this. Our first option at knowing something is a totally self-transcending objective order where we can know all of reality in a comprehensive, inexhaustible sense by rising totally outside of ourselves. But that is philosophically, logically, and biologically impossible. You would no more allow the opposing team's uncle of the pitcher to call this balls and strikes when they're playing against you than you would call somebody with this kind of prejudice to define the whole universe for you. So you've got the total transcendent objective way of looking at it. The second one is total determinism. Total determinism runs something like this. It is the idea that we are so locked into our DNA, so locked into our biochemical makeup, that whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we reason is that locked-in, pre-programmed, predetermined reaction to the hard wiring and the soft wiring that we have. Like a computer, if you press this button, that will emerge. If you press a combination of these buttons, that's the way it will be. I remember when I was doing some courses at Cambridge University, listening to Stephen Hawking speak. And Stephen Hawking was going to give a talk on is humanity determined or free. The auditorium was jammed. As you know, Hawking has suffered from Lou Gehrig's disease, is not able to speak, and therefore a Caltech scientist has made for him a fantastic computer that takes the letters that he puts in, forms the words, collates them into sentences, and then synthetically produces a voice on the basis of which he speaks. So he prepares his talk long before. There are two ways in which he controls it, either by a 1 centimeter move of his index finger, which controls an infrared ray, or if that stops working, by the batting of an eyelid. This brilliant scientist is able to somehow communicate and speak to the audiences. His whole talk was on this: is humanity determined or free? He said there was no escape from the fact that determinism was the inexorable flow of naturalistic assumptions. There's no way to break away from this hardwiring. But listen now to how Berlinski responds to one of the scientists who did this study. After comparing listen very carefully to this quote, please. After comparing more than 2,000 DNA samples, an American molecular geneticist, Dean Hamer, concluded that a person's capacity to believe in God is linked to his brain chemicals. And he goes on to say, we take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity. But listen now. It is because he is hardwired by his brain chemicals. Perhaps it will not be amiss, says Berlinski, that Dr. Hamer has made the same claim about homosexuality. And if he has refrained from arguing that a person's capacity to believe in molecular genetics is linked to a brain chemical, it is no doubt owing to the prudent sense that once that door is open, God alone knows how and when anyone will be able to slam it shut again. See what he's saying? That a person's belief in God is sort of ultimately produced by some kind of chemicals in the brain. He's wired and the chemistry produces that. He went on to say that that's how homosexuality is ultimately produced. And Berlinski rightly raises the question, if all of our behavior and all of our thinking is so chemically engendered, what about the belief itself that it is all chemically engendered is not produced by some chemistry? You follow what I'm saying? This deterministic, locked in, If everything is the product of that hardwiring, why is the thought itself not a product of hardwiring and therefore neither true nor false? And so as we move from total objectivity to total determinism, we come to the third option, which is semi-transcendence. This is the way I see it. Humanity is able to move outside of itself to a legitimate degree, and what it ends up doing really in the ability to move out of itself to a legitimate degree is able to then measure its pronouncements by external testing, by external verification for correspondence and coherence. When you make a statement, you can check it out correspondingly to be true. When you build a system, you can look at it as a systemically coherent worldview. This is the way it is in our courts of law. This ought to be the way it is in a scientific lab itself. When you make a statement, it's measured against the referent. When you put together a system, it ought to be coherent and brought together. Total transcendence is logically, biologically, and ideologically impossible. Total determinism is self-defeating. The semi-transcendent way is the only way where you're able to half rise outside of yourself, make meaningful statements about reality, and measure them up against the truth as they really correspond. I will check this out against what Jesus taught and said as we progress along. But what we are told by the scientists is ultimately this, that we cannot get out from determinism, but they make positions of absolute statement all along, vitiating that principle as it begins, that they themselves are determined to say that. So I've penned this statement down. What the naturalist does is to claim total transcendence, an impossibility, while biologically driven to determinism, making a logically fatal move by attacking the only meaningful option of semi-transcendence and crucifying it with the psychological description of delusion. They look at you and me and tell us that we are ultimately deluded. So I want to move to this championing of their delusion cause and respond with the answers of Christ. The fact of the matter is this, that as we move and understand it, the term has taken on such coinage. Richard Dawkins wrote The God Delusion. Our friend Alistair McGrath from Oxford responded with the Dawkins delusion. David Aikman wrote The Delusion of Disbelief, and David Berlinski, The Devil's Delusion. So the word delusion is floating around all over the place now, each one telling the other that he or she is completely deluded. I have present in the audience a psychologist who helped me get this from a book, The Essentials of Clinical Practice. Here's the definition they give of delusion, and I want to show to you at the end of it who is more deluded in their thinking. Delusions are the most extreme deviation in thought content. They are defined as fixed false beliefs that are maintained despite objective evidence and logical argument to the contrary. Furthermore, the belief is not one ordinarily shared by others who have similar educational or sociocultural backgrounds. Let me repeat some words here. They are the most extreme deviation in thought. They are defined as fixed false beliefs that are maintained despite objective evidence and logical argument to the contrary. Furthermore, the belief is not one ordinarily shared by others who have similar educational or socio-cultural backgrounds. Now, they tell us that our belief in God is delusionary, that our faith in God is that one of a delusion. So let me start off positioning two possibilities and then move to the argument for existence from God and ultimately show why it is the Christ who reveals to us that which is true, which is what the atheists are really resisting. Many, many years ago, when I was at university and doing my studies at graduate work, the biggest named atheist then was Anthony Flew. At that time, we had to read everything Anthony Flew had written. Now, of late,